If you're looking for massive upside in fantasy football for week 6, we got 10 players that we think could deliver. Let's start by looking for some bounce backs from big name players who haven't done that recently. Chris, who's your first pick?
My first pick is Bijan Robinson. And before you say, okay, you're just picking this guy because you guys like Bijan or whatever. No, I have real data to support Bijan Robinson this week. First of all, he's playing the Carolina Panthers, who once again this year are the worst against running backs. They're allowing over 22 points per game to running backs this year. They've given up 10 touchdowns to running backs in 5 games so far this year. And they've also allowed the 18th most points to running backs in the receiving game. And I know you think Bijan Robinson, you're like, well, he's not getting the touches. The Tyler Algier is getting work, but that's really not the case. Bijan Robinson right now ranks 10th among all running backs in expected fantasy points. And believe it or not, he's gotten every single carry inside the 5-yard line. The problem is they just haven't been running the ball a lot because they've been in like these shootout, high-scoring games where they have to throw or they're coming from behind having to throw. But this week, that should not be an issue. They should be in control. Bijan should get the ball plenty in this game. He's got massive touchdown upside in this game. And even though it feels like he hasn't been great this year, he's also faced some really tough defenses. Pittsburgh, 6th best against the run. KC, best against the run. Eagles, 15th. Saints, 12th. Tampa Bay, 16th. He has not had a smash matchup yet. He gets it this week. I know you're worried about him. I know you're panicked. Do I bench Bijan? No, don't bench Bijan. Start him this week. He's going to bounce back big.
You know, some people are worried about Bijan. People are just downright panicking about Breece Hall because, man, it's been rough. Last week gave you absolutely nothing. And of course, now the Jets, it's like all hell is broken loose here because after an embarrassing loss to the Vikings in London, at least embarrassing for owner of the Jets, look, their head coach is fired midweek, just like that, after 5 games. Let's talk about Breece Hall. What is going on here? Is this just all of a sudden going to be a dumpster fire? No. Look, let's back off. They're not winless, right? They may not be above 500, but they are still totally fine, and this offense will bounce back. Look, this was the Minnesota Vikings. In fact, this is not only a team that's been really good this year, they are the toughest run defense statistically in the league. So maybe that's why Breece Hall didn't do anything. And of course, Aaron Rodgers throwing interceptions. What's going to happen here? A lot of times when teams hit a rough patch like this, and especially got this big change like a new head coach, well, they just get back to basics, and that's running the ball. And so I think we're going to have a big Breece Hall game. It wasn't just last week against the Vikings. He had this really tough matchup. They've had tough matchups throughout most of their games this entire season. In fact, 4 of their first 5 opponents have been in the top half of rushing defense. So Breece Hall has had some good moments, but also some bad moments and some down games. That might just be why, all right? So this is now a chance to bounce back against Buffalo. Yeah, that's a tough opponent and a tough defense, but a tough defense against the pass. They actually give up the second most fantasy points per game to running backs. They've become sort of a funnel defense here, a run funnel defense. And again, I feel like Breece Hall is going to touch the ball more than he has yet this season. I'm not giving up on him. And this is actually a good time to buy into Breece Hall because now all of a sudden they're going to get a lot easier of a schedule going forward, facing teams like the Dolphins, the Jaguars, the Rams. So yeah, this is a definite Breece Hall bounce back. Don't drop him. Don't trade him. In fact, you have to start him. Now let's talk receivers. But first, if you're getting value out of this video, hit the like and subscribe button. We appreciate it. All right, now let's talk about a receiver who has done nothing for 4 straight weeks because he hasn't played.
That's right, but he's back. A.J. Brown is back to save your fantasy teams this week. He practiced fully yesterday, so he should be good to go this week. And look, in week 1, the only week we saw him, he led this team, this Eagles team, with a 26% target share and a 36 first read percentage. Now, that's not surprising. It's A.J. Brown. Like, that's what you expect. But I think he's going to come back and absolutely carry your fantasy team this week. He's facing this Cleveland Browns secondary, which used to be one you wanted to avoid, but this year they're 20th in terms of fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. But here's why I really like A.J. Brown this week. Cleveland plays man defense at the highest rate in the entire NFL. Almost 50% of the time, they are in man-to-man coverage. You look at A.J. Brown in week 1, I know, small sample, only 1 game, but he averaged 1.41 fantasy points per route run against man coverage. But even if you go back to last year, the entire season of 2023, he was first in fantasy points per route run against man coverage. A.J. Brown dominates man coverage, one of the best man coverage wide receivers in the NFL, and he's coming back to face this Brown secondary that's going to throw a ton of man at him, and they can't handle A.J. Brown. We saw a few weeks ago Malik Nabers went off against his defense. They tried to press Malik Nabers, tried to man cover him. It didn't work. It's not going to work against A.J. Brown either. He's going to dominate this week, coming back to rescue your fantasy teams.
All right, time for another stud receiver to make a comeback. Look, Chris Godwin has been fine, but we don't want fine. We want the number one receiver in fantasy, which is what he was after the first 2 weeks of the season. It looked like Godwin was going to carry your team single-handedly. But look, this is the thing with the Bucs Saints. It's always the Evans and Lattimore show. You might not know this, but Mike Evans and Marshawn Lattimore, the corner on the other side there, Pro Bowler for the Saints, they've got a beef going on for years now. And honestly, Evans just doesn't win most of the time. And last year, Evans didn't do a whole lot in each game where these two division rivals met. Evans exactly 3 catches. One time it was for 40 yards, and the other I think was like for 70 yards. No touchdowns. He's had games before where he got completely eliminated by Lattimore. So while those two are going at it, Chris Godwin is going to be the one who is going off. Last year, just to prove the point that this matchup does mean something, while Evans was getting at least limited, if not shut out, in the 2 games against New Orleans last year, Chris Godwin had 8 catches for 114 yards and 3 catches for 81 yards and a touchdown. Yeah, he's going to benefit from this matchup a lot. All right, you already know those players. Let's get to some other guys who are maybe streaming or flex options. Not must starts, but these guys do offer a ton of upside, so you might want to take a hard look at them. All right, Chris, let's start with running back, who's now suddenly on the upswing.
Yeah, DeAndre Swift definitely on the upswing, and I think you got to roll with him again this week. You look at it over the last 2 games, he ranks first among all running backs in expected fantasy points, and he has the 7th most rushing yards over the last 2 games. And what's crazy about this, even though he's been good, he's had terrible touchdown luck. He's had 5 carries inside the 5-yard line. He's been tackled at the goal line 3 times. Meanwhile, Rashawn Johnson getting these cheapy little touchdowns. It's like Swift gets tackled at the 1, Rashawn Johnson scores. That could change this week against Jacksonville. They're allowing the 26th most points to running backs, and they're allowing over a touchdown per game to running backs. He's been on fire the last couple of weeks. I think it continues this week. And look, even if you don't have DeAndre Swift, or maybe you're like, I don't have room for him in my starting lineup, go take advantage of his line on Underdog. Right now, 16.5 receiving yards. He's gone over 20 receiving yards in 4 straight games. No reason he won't do it this week. Take the higher on DeAndre Swift. Pair it with this Brock Purdy new customer special tonight on Thursday Night Football. That's an easy way to get a win right out of the gates. Just make sure you join using promo code ENDGAME so you get that free Brock Purdy pick plus up to $1,000 in bonus cash.
All right, I'm going to go back to a player I talked about on the waiver wire video. Chase Brown is probably not out there in any more leagues at this point now that waivers have run for a lot of you. But if you did get him, or maybe you already had him, I'm going to say he's going to be a very strong flex or an RB if you need someone to start. Again, I can't say absolutely have to start him, but I'm feeling good because, first of all, as suspected, Zach Moss not practicing early in the week. We'll see what happens before game time. But man, if you look at that injury from last Sunday, didn't look good. Chase Brown, at the very least, will get more touches than usual, if not all of the touches in the backfield if Moss doesn't play. But here's the thing. He's been providing value even with Moss there, sharing the backfield touches with him. His opportunities had already been ramped up, as I mentioned, 33 in the last 2 games, and he's scoring touchdowns. And the funny thing is he's not just doing what we thought he might do is rip off a long run and score from distance. He's getting goal line carries, and he's cashed in. Both times they've given him a carry inside the 10-yard line. He scored a touchdown. They've given Zach Moss 10 carries inside the 10-yard line, and he scored the exact same number of touchdowns, only twice. Despite being a little smaller, is Chase Brown actually the better goal line back? I don't know if they see it that way, but it looks like he can be trusted in those situations. Well, look, at the very least, you are getting that big play upside. This guy's averaging 5.6 yards per carry on the season with more opportunities now in the near future. Chase Brown is looking like a very solid choice against the Giants defense, which has been good but not great. It's not going to scare me off of him. If Chase Brown is going to have this backfield to himself, I'm going to be all in. All right, how about a receiver who could be a very strong flex?
I think Josh Downs looking like maybe even better than a strong flex right now. Going up against the Tennessee Titans, you look, they've been very good against wide receivers, but they struggle against slot wide receivers. They give up the highest percentage of targets to slot wide receivers this year. Josh Downs currently leads all wide receivers in routes from the slot at 89%. In week 5, he led this Colts team with a 26% target share and led the team with a first read percentage of 33. And guess what? Michael Pittman is out. That's right. Shocking turn of events here. Michael Pittman ruled out with a back injury, might be headed to IR. All the stars are aligning for Josh Downs in this matchup. And over on Fantasy Points, they have this really cool tool that shows a coverage grade where it looks at all the way defenses, how they roll out different coverages, and how the wide receivers match up against that coverage. He has a plus 9.3 score this week that ranks 16th among all wide receivers. So this is a plus matchup for Josh Downs. Look, we don't know quite yet if it's going to be Anthony Richardson or Joe Flacco. If it's Joe Flacco, Josh Downs is almost a smash, like auto start. But even if it's Anthony Richardson, I think he's going to do great with no Pittman running out of the slot against this Titans secondary. So if you grab Josh Downs off a waiver wire and you need an upside flex this week, he's your guy.
I'm going to go back to that Bears-Jaguars matchup. I think that Rome Odunze might find himself with another big game. That's right. He did already have one. Remember a couple of weeks ago, had a 100-yard game, had his first touchdown in the NFL. And now he gets a great chance because it's the Jaguars defense. Jaguars have allowed 300 or more passing yards in 3 of their first 5 games. Well, Caleb Williams has been coming on. He himself had another 300-yard game last week. So what about the receivers? Because DJ Moore was really the main target. He had himself a game last week. Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze were fairly quiet. I mean, they each got 6 targets. Yeah, Odunze caught 5 of them, but the yardage was not that great. But again, it's the Jaguars. This is a prime opportunity for him to bust out, make a big play down the field. His ADOT is the highest out of all Bears receivers. And if you don't know what that means, I'm talking about average depth of target. It's 11.7. That is almost twice as much as Keenan Allen's. And so when he's getting targeted, not only is his catch rate higher than Keenan's, meaning he's making the most of his targets, he's getting bigger chunks of yardage. And that's why they brought him in. Look, Keenan Allen might be serviceable. As a floor play in PPR, maybe. Odunze is the high ceiling upside receiver who can make those big plays. And against this defense, I really think he will. All right, we've talked running back, receiver. What about quarterback and tight end? A lot of you like to stream or need to stream for this week. Let's give you our favorite options at each, starting with a tight end.
And my favorite streaming option with upside this week at tight end is definitely Zach Ertz going against the Baltimore Ravens. First of all, the Ravens are a pass funnel defense, meaning they're very strong against the run, not so good against the pass. And also, you look at Zach Ertz, like, yeah, he's been okay coming off a bad game here where he only had 10 yards. But he did have 8 targets last week. And he also has a 17.9% target share, which is the 8th highest among all tight ends. So he's been involved every single game this year. But what I really like about Zach Ertz this week in this matchup, not just the fact that the Ravens are bad against the pass, the Ravens play zone over 60% of the time. You look at Zach Ertz this year, you look at his yards per route run against man coverage this year, it's a measly 0.18. That is almost nothing, right? Like, he cannot beat man. But then you look at him against zone coverage. That jumps all the way up to 2 yards per route run against zone coverage. And another thing is, he hasn't scored a touchdown yet this year, but he ranks 7th among all tight ends in red zone targets. Maybe not only do we see Zach Ertz have some of his biggest yardage totals of the season, but maybe we actually finally see him find the end zone this week. He's in this great Washington offense attached to Jaden Daniels. He's still widely available on so many waiver wires. If you're desperate at tight end, go get Zach Ertz. He's got upside.
All right, I hate to be all in on a team, especially an offense like the Bears, but here we go. Let's go all in on the Bears this week. I've already talked about that Jags defense not being good. I'm sticking with that. If I like Rome Odunze, why wouldn't I like Caleb Williams? It just makes sense. And a lot of people are still skeptical. Sure, most of his games this year for fantasy haven't been good, and he hasn't really broken out yet. And of course, he hasn't lived up to expectations because when you're the number 1 overall pick and people have been hyping you up since you were in college, the expectations are massive. He doesn't have to be the number 1 quarterback in all of fantasy or the world this week. He just has to be good enough to stream and to have a good game like he did last week. Can definitely do that against the Jaguars. He's been improving. He did just put up, like I said, a 300-yard game again. and now it's a better matchup. And some people will point to the fact like, well, he's only going to do well against those bad defenses, right? He played Indy. We've talked about that defense, played Carolina. So, it's just a matter of weak matchups, but not necessarily. His quarterback rating, if you're into that kind of thing, has gone up now for 3 straight weeks. He's been getting better, and here's what he's not doing: turning the ball over. He hasn't thrown an interception over the last 2 weeks. Jaguars are probably not going to be the team that does that because they're one of only 3 teams in the NFL that don't have a single defensive interception. All right. So when I say the matchup is good, I mean it. He's not turning the ball over. The running game is going, which is why we like DeAndre Swift this week. I mean, everything is in place for him to go off. If you're streaming here, I mean, yeah, Kirk Cousins seems like a no brainer. If you have Kirk Cousins available, sure, go with him. But man, after that, I don't see how you could not go with Caleb Williams if he's on your waiver wire or you need some upside. If you didn't already catch our start sit for every single position to help you win this week, check it out in the playlist.